Chapter 25. Off to Osse's we go. Haldir was up before Sauron the next morning. Not that it had really been anything of a choice. Haldir hadn't slept at all the night before. After having dozed off lightly a couple of times, he finally had just given up somewhere in the very early morning. Staring at the ceiling had not been amusing in any sort of way, so he figured that he could at least try to do something productive. Thus he had dragged his sorry, not to mention very tired, behind out of bed, and got changed quickly before trudging downstairs. And there he had been for the last few hours. Finally, however, he heard feet upon the stairs and picked his head up off the table. A moment later, Sauron appeared around the corner, coming into the kitchen with an expression amazingly scowlless. That was until he noticed that Haldir was there, and his face instantly dropped into its usual appearance.
"What are you doing down here already?"
he asked.
"I'm always the first one up."
"I couldn't sleep,"
Haldir drawled out. Sauron raised a brow.
"And in saying that you couldn't sleep, does this mean that you just couldn't fall back to sleep and so got up? Or that you couldn't go to sleep at all?"
"None. At all."
"Well, that would explain why you look like the living dead,"
Sauron reasoned. Haldir groaned.
Is it really that bad?"
Sauron considered him for a moment.
"No, not really. But it does look like you didn't sleep at all."
Ugh.
Haldir mumbled, pulling his hands down his face.
"I'm not fit to see a Maya today."
At this, Sauron frowned even more, taking on a very indignant stance.
"And just what am I, then?
Haldir looked up at him sleepily and shrugged.
"You don't count."
"I do too count. You didn't even see the ocean until we were sailing from Mandos to here. So why would Osse matter to you at all?"
"How do you know that I never saw the ocean?"
Haldir asked.
"Because I could tell."
"And how could you tell?"
"I might have sorted through your thoughts a bit while we were walking here from the docks, after we got out of Mandos."
"What?"
Haldir cried, just awake enough to be shocked at this new revelation.
"I was bored. They wouldn't let me talk,"
Sauron said, as though it was some type of defense that would actually work.
"Why did you do that to me, though? Why not one of the others?"
"I never said that I didn't dig through their thoughts a bit too, did I?"
He paused for a second and looked behind him, as though to make sure that nobody else was about, which of course there wasn't, then said,
"Let me tell you, Eleth has done some pretty bad stuff, considering who he always appears to be."
"Don't tell me! That's not fair! You don't go snooping around in people's thoughts."
"Well, you don't, obviously. I haven't been able to do that for over a year now, ever since they took away any power I had that would give me an advantage over you."
"It's clear why they did that, though. Nobody should do stuff like that. It just isn't right."
Sauron raised a brow.
"You do realize that right isn't really a word that has ever mattered much to me, don't you?"
Haldir sighed.
"So you know that I hadn't seen the ocean. I'm guessing that you didn't just pick up stupid things like that."
There was a long pause.
"Okay, what are you getting at?"
Sauron asked, finally.
"I know you're tired, but just say what you mean, and don't beat around the bush."
"How much dirt did you dig up?"
Haldir said, figuring that it was a terse enough answer. After a nod, Sauron answered.
"Enough to give me things to blackmail you about for a good while. I was a bit surprised. You were worse than I ever would have given you credit for. At least until you got that sister. Then you went all noble and boring."
"That's nice to know,"
Haldir said.
"Anyways, why would Osse count as a Maya when he's always around the sea, and so you have no reason to think he counts? And yet, when you were alive in Middle-earth, I would have been a threat, and yet I don't count."
"You just don't."
"That doesn't answer my question, though."
"I don't think you'd like the answer, so I'm keeping it to myself."
Sauron narrowed his eyes.
Why wouldn't I like the answer?
Because I just don't think you would,
Haldir replied as he heaved himself up out of the chair.
Tell me.
No.
Come on! Why does he count and I don't?
Haldir shook his head as he made his way out of the kitchen. Now that Sauron was up, he figured that he'd get ready the rest of the way so they could leave soon and get this whole thing over with. Sauron, however, followed him up.
I want to know.
And I don't want to tell you.
Haldir droned.
Why not?
I already told you that.
But that wasn't any sort of explanation. It doesn't count.
Of course it does. Now see, we're even. You think something counts that I don't think counts, and I think something counts that you don't think counts. Can you drop it?
Not really. Come on, just say it.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Meh.
Haldir said, deciding just to stop talking as he went into his room and shut the door in Sauron's face. Haldir heard Sauron make a sound of frustration from outside the door, but ignored it. He sat on his bed and began to braid his hair back in silence, his mind completely blank from his lack of rest. Then he heard Sauron speak, although his voice was slightly muffled by the door.
Just say it, you sissy little elf. Why don't I count?
Haldir didn't reply. Being called a sissy elf did not bother him especially.
Do you think that I will get mad at what you say and hammer you into a bloody pulp in the corner or something?
Contemplating the suggestion for a minute, Haldir figured that it was probably pretty close to the truth.
Oh, so you are admitting that I could completely beat you up.
Haldir dropped his braid. It was finished anyways. Slowly, he got up off the bed and went to the door, opening it to a very annoyed Sauron. Looking at him, Haldir could think of nothing he would rather do than punch him square in the nose. Even with how tired he was, the rational part of his mind piped up that it would be better to suppress that desire, as he really had no idea whether Sauron could beat him into a bloody pulp in a corner or not. Today it wouldn't even be a contest, though, as simply walking had been a fight unto itself.
You do not count because you cannot do anything besides what I can do, so you're not special. Happy now?
Having said all that he was going to, he closed the door again.
Not especially.
Sauron replied quietly through the door after a moment. Haldir did not really take any mind to what Sauron had said, though, until he heard a thud against the wall. He paused in mid-step and turned back, opening the door after a moment and peeking into the hall. Sauron had his head resting against it, which Haldir supposed would explain the bang he had heard a moment before. What didn't get explained was why he had done it.
What was that for?
Haldir instantly asked.
You're right.
Haldir didn't know if he had heard correctly.
Come again?
You're right.
Sauron repeated, walking down the hall.
I don't count.
At this point, it was hard to tell if this was really a good thing. Normally, there wouldn't be any question, but Haldir had a feeling that perhaps it wasn't as good as he would have thought.
Why are you giving in so easily? Even on the rare occasion that you thought I was right, you still argued just for the sake of arguing.
Sauron shrugged. Now Haldir decided this really wasn't a good thing. He could sense this whole brooding air coming off Sauron in waves, and letting him go off into his own little world for long amounts of time was definitely never anything positive. So basically it came to choosing the less of two evils. Either he could get away with not having to go see Osse for a reason that he was sure was less than good, or he could risk whatever things Sauron would get into by being left to his own devices. Sadly, he figured that going and seeing Osse would probably be better. At least then there was a chance that whatever Sauron's plans were would be ruined before they were ever really made.
What are you planning on doing now?
I don't know.
Changed your mind about seeing Osse, then?
There was a moment of silence, and Sauron paused.
I don't think it'd do any good.
He said slowly.
Why?
Because nothing I do works out anyways.
That's true. You are a pretty poor planner.
Although he would not have admitted it, Haldir did not believe that Sauron was actually bad at planning things out. He just thought that perhaps if he said that Sauron might get into one of those, well, I'll show you sort of moods. Sauron did turn to him at his words.
I'm a poor planner?
he asked slowly.
Apparently. I mean, if you were organized, they would probably work better, wouldn't they?
And that was all it took.
I am organized,
he said, crossing his arms.
You have no idea how much having things messed up bothers me.
Well, it can't be much, as you went around with messed up hair.
Will you just get off the hair? Jeez, seriously. That's completely irrelevant to the topic. My plans fail because of oversights.
Which occur because you don't think the whole thing through.
No, it's because things which I hadn't taken into consideration come up.
They were things that you probably should have taken into consideration.
I doubt that you would have, if you had been in those situations.
If you say so.
Sauron looked just a bit cross.
Okay, fine. We're going to see Osse, and if my plan does not work, it isn't because I failed to notice an issue which could ruin it. It's because some things are just out of my control at the moment, and there was not anything I could do about it.
With that, he stormed down the stairs, Haldir right behind him. It was probably the first time he had actually been pleased that Sauron had gotten mad about something. Hopefully be the last, too. When they got down, Sauron instantly went towards the door, but Haldir stopped him.
You can't just go rushing out like that,
Haldir piped up.
Why not?
Sauron griped.
Just hold up a second.
Haldir dashed into the kitchen quickly and pulled the small box of money out from one of the cupboards. Not wanting to take the time to count it, he just grabbed a handful and shoved it in a pocket before hurrying back to the door.
So, do you have any idea where you are going?
He finally asked as he turned the corner to the entryway. Sauron's hand hovered over the handle of the door for a second, but then turned it.
No, at least not yet.
Oh, great,
Haldir said, trying to remind himself that this would probably be better than the alternative. They went down the streets towards the main road in silence. At that time, there was almost nobody out, just a few scattered people every once in a while. As Haldir yawned, he figured that everybody must just be acting sanely and were still asleep at that hour. After walking for a while, they finally came to the edge of Valmar. One last gate stood in front of them. Seeing this, Haldir was suddenly hit with a thought.
We're going to the docks first, aren't we?
Sauron nodded.
Yes, I figured that it would be the best place to start.
Haldir stopped in the road, thinking. It took Sauron a moment to realize that he wasn't following anymore, but when he did, he stopped too.
It will take a couple hours to get there, and then a couple more to get back.
He thought aloud.
Yes, more than likely. Now come on.
Haldir did not listen and continued to muse quietly.
Who knows how long it will take us to find him from there?
Sighing, Sauron walked back towards him.
What are you getting at?
I think,
Haldir began slowly,
that we should get horses.
Ugh, no!
Sauron instantly exclaimed, cringing.
Why ever would I do that?
I don't want to have to stay somewhere else overnight, and I don't want to be walking in the dark. Therefore, we need to get there quicker than we would on foot, and the only way to do that would be to ride horses.
I hate horses, though,
Sauron complained.
You know, you are not making a very good case for yourself with having things planned out by having a snag in the plan like half an hour in.
Well, I had planned on you being able to walk at night. See, that you won't or can't or whatever is out of my control. There isn't anything that I can do about that.
Okay, so now you have a problem, and there is only one way to fix it.
After giving a very unhappy frown, Sauron conceded.
Fine.
They backtracked a bit and with very little search found a stable. Sauron stayed outside while Haldir went in and bargained a bit with the owner. Within a minute they had settled a deal, and the elf had led Haldir back out to get the horses. Sauron had fallen into step behind Haldir silently. The owner pointed them to the stable, where another person had shown them which horses they would have. While there was something that the hand needed to see to at the moment, he said that if they needed any help that he would be around the corner. With that, Haldir and Sauron were left in the stable before the pens of their horses. Haldir instantly went in and led his horse out. On the other hand, Sauron stood staring at his like it was some evil obstacle that he was not sure how to get around.
Come on, get over it. We won't be riding for 8 hours straight, so you have no reason to be freaking out.
Sauron didn't move, but answered.
I'm not freaking out. I just don't like it. Stupid horse.
The horse just stared back at him.
The horse never did anything to you. You should just be grateful that for some reason it hasn't picked up on your evil soul and decided that it doesn't like you.
Sauron shot him a look, but did not reply.
Just get it and let's go before I decide that this whole thing is pointless,
Haldir said exasperatedly. Reluctantly, Sauron opened the gate.
It doesn't have a saddle,
he pointed out, looking back over his shoulder at Haldir.
No, normally we don't ride them that way,
Haldir replied, leading his horse out of the stable.
Great.
Sauron muttered as he grabbed the reins and led the horse out too. Haldir smirked as he mounted.
Remember, if I can do it, that means you can too.
Considering that for a moment, Sauron shrugged.
If you say so.
Haldir held back a laugh as Sauron made his slightly less than graceful, yet still a bit more than Haldir thought it would have been, mount. After clutching to the reins for a moment, he seemed to relax a bit and looked at Haldir. Figuring that he expected him to do something, Haldir spoke.
What? You're the leader. I'm just coming along because I don't have a choice.
Sauron muttered something to himself quietly and nudged the horse forward, Haldir not far behind. All things considered, Haldir enjoyed the ride very much. It was sunny, yet not hot, which wasn't much of a surprise as the temperature there seemed as though it never really changed. Everything was, as always, in its perpetual state of spring, and considering that Haldir had not truly left the limits of Valmar for a year, he found that he liked it very much. What it was like in the open and the woods had become a distant memory, and it was pleasant to experience it again. Sauron didn't speak a word the whole time, seeming quite content to focus on keeping himself on the horse. That Haldir had found to be an additional comfort. Having to bicker the whole way would have just completely ruined the scenery. It was likely an hour or so before noon when Haldir could finally hear the sound of gulls. His ears prickled a bit at the noise, but he brushed off the effects immediately, as he was quite happy with his present situation, or at least he had been for nearly the last year. He didn't really want to feel the need to go and sit by the sea for hours on end and all that stuff. Sauron's expression was steadily turning more sour as they went, and the sounds of the ocean became clearer and more numerous. Again, Haldir couldn't help but wonder exactly what it was that he was up to. Might have been a good thing to implore a bit into the subject before they had left. Finally, the trees broke apart and they saw the haven spread before them. Now, at midday, it was very busy, small boats flitting across the bay, while larger ones slowly came to port. Haldir was a bit surprised that looking at it now, he could not recall anything about it. He knew that he had been there, and remembered walking the docks, but it didn't seem as though it had truly happened. Maybe it was because his brain had had to process a lot the day they had arrived. As they went further, Haldir shook free of his thoughts.
Now where?
He asked, looking at the expansive city and harborage laying before them.
I already told you that I don't know,
Sauron remarked automatically.
Then what are we going to do?
Look for things.
Such as?
Sauron shook his head slightly.
Well, what sort of things would you look for if you were searching for a Maya who loves water?
Water?
Haldir said slowly.
Besides the obvious,
Sauron exclaimed. With a sigh which more or less implied that Haldir was hopeless, Sauron explained.
We're probably going to be looking right on the waterfront. We're also probably going to be looking at a building that is larger than most and has many people around it. Agreed?
Sure,
Haldir replied. How was he supposed to know? There was no answer to this, and so Haldir decided to be quiet. He'd just let Sauron do the work and figure out where they needed to go, and he'd just go off into his own thoughts. If Sauron just ended up getting lost, then he might pay a bit more attention. Not that his attention would really help in that area. So they went through the city, slowly making their way towards the shore. It was there, when they had gotten close to the docks, that Haldir had an epiphany.
We should ask one of the shipwrights or a sailor,
he said suddenly.
Yes, that would probably be a good idea.
There was a pause, and when Sauron did not appear to have any inclination of actually going and asking anybody, Haldir piped up again.
Well?
Well, what?
Sauron asked, looking back at him momentarily.
Aren't you going to ask?
No.
Why not?
It's not something I do.
You've asked me stuff before.
That's different. I can ask people I know things occasionally, but I don't go and ask strangers questions.
Why not?
I don't want to get into it.
Why not?
And you say I'm immature!
Sauron looking back at him again with an expression of amazement.
Why not? Why not? Why not?
He mocked, raising his voice to an annoyingly high pitch.
It's like playing 20 questions or something. Only you're always asking the same one.
Geez, testy.
Haldir replied, quite untouched, although to tell the truth it had been slightly amusing to listen to Sauron do a falsetto.
I don't ask random people questions, because I do not know enough of their character to believe or discredit what they say.
So does that mean you trust me?
Haldir replied sarcastically.
I'm so touched. It's like a bonding moment.
Oh, please.
Sauron muttered.
I just have been able to figure out enough of your mannerisms and nature to have a good idea of what I can accept or not. With other people, I haven't had the opportunity.
You are much too paranoid,
Haldir said sadly.
It's like you think the whole world is out to get you.
Unfortunately, he only realized the truth of his words after he had said them. He never really had been one to think overly much before he spoke. As expected, Sauron gave him a look.
Okay, so the whole world would be out to get you if they knew who you were. But the thing is that they do not know who you really are, and therefore they can't be after you. They don't have any reason to. That is, unless you give them one.
Do you ever consider what you are going to say before you spout it off to the world?
Not really.
I didn't think so. That being the case, just be quiet and look.
I still don't know what I'm looking for.
Then just be quiet and pretend that you are looking. Let me concentrate at least.
All right.
The narrow roads got busier as they went, and Haldir figured that they had better find a stable to leave the horses in, as the roads didn't really seem to be made with the thought of having horses in them. When they came to a small corral, Haldir made the suggestion to Sauron, whose quick acceptance of it made it obvious that he still wasn't comfortable being high in the saddle. Again he bargained, and within minutes the horses were in the corral with the few others. Haldir felt pretty proud of himself, and all of these negotiations he had handled in one day. Granted, the people had been pretty willing to make a deal, but still, he hadn't done so for many years.
See, that wasn't so bad, was it?
Haldir asked Sauron when they started walking again.
I'm not going to talk too soon. Ask me when we get back.
Well, even if he hadn't said that it was not bad, he hadn't said it had been, so that counted for something.